Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this webinar on the value of advanced therapies. It's exactly 12 o'clock and we are getting started, expecting people to join us as we start. My name is Violeta Georgieva, and today I'm moderating the first of a series of webinars which will be hosted by my organization, EuropaBio, throughout this year on the topic of advanced therapies. For those of you who are not familiar with us, EuropaBio represents the European biotechnology community, a big part of which is made up of developers of advanced therapies in the EU. And our objective with this series of events is to make the amazing science which goes into developing cell and gene therapies better understood, as well as the incredible value they bring for patients, for their families, and for our society at large. The notable speakers we have with us today will explain what gene and cell therapies are and what change they bring about in three main domains. So firstly, for patients. Secondly, for the policies we need to support innovation. And thirdly, for the future organization of health and care delivery in the EU. We will have two panels, which will focus on two different medical advances in two critical disease areas. The first panel will tackle gene therapies for rare diseases, and the second panel will address CAR-T treatments for cancer. And before we kick off the first panel, here are some housekeeping rules. And I first would like to thank you very much for being with us today. We have 50 people on the line right now, and it is lunchtime. I appreciate that, so please don't deny yourself lunch, but listen up and participate actively in our discussion. We'll have two separate Q&A sessions, and you have the possibility to ask questions. You can type your question in the Q&A box, and you can direct it to one of our panelists or to more of them. You can also interact with the entire audience by leaving a comment in the chat box, and please don't forget to say who you are and who you represent. This event is also being recorded, and the recording will be made available together with the slides after the event. And lastly, before I leave the floor to our distinguished speakers, if you fancy social media, here are our EuropaBio hashtags, so please don't hesitate to engage in the conversations with us. So we are now off to our first panel, and it is my pleasure to introduce to you Dirk van der Meijsbrouge, who is a Vice President Medical Affairs Lead for Rare Diseases in International Developed Markets for Pfizer. Dirk is a medical doctor, and he did practice his profession in his early career. And now with his company, he's striving to fundamentally transform what it means to live with a rare disease by focusing on small patient populations, but with the ambition for big impact. And the best means I understand Dirk and his company found to make a difference for rare disease patients is through gene therapies. And we'll hear lots on the topic from Dirk. The floor is yours, Dirk.
Thank you, Georgina, and good morning, good afternoon to all the attendees on the call. Can I move to the next slide, please? So as a way of introduction, I think it's fair to say that various rare diseases are individually rare, but collectively they tend to be common. And the definition for rare diseases is slightly different in various parts of the world, but in essence, they look very similar. In Europe, we're using a definition of less than 5 individuals in 10,000 being affected. That's when we call it the rare disease. And you see definitions used in the US, and Japanese definitions used in Japan. And again, they are fairly similar. What's important to note is that 80% of rare diseases tend to have a genetic origin. And I think what's really remarkable is that even within one generation, so when I graduated medical school, there were hardly any therapies available for rare diseases. Now, still only less than 5% have there is an approved therapy for some of these rare diseases. So numerically, we made a progress, but still the unmet need is incredibly high. Important to note is that a lot of the rare diseases affect children, and 30% of these children die before the age of 5. So it's certainly an area of still extremely high unmet medical need. Next slide, please. But science is not standing still. and we made incredible progress with science. And again, if I look at my generation, when I graduated medical school, most of the treatments that were available, not only for rare disease, but in general, most treatments were so-called small molecules, really designed and developed and able to really symptomatic relief, right? In the 80s, 90s, there was a next wave of innovation and the introduction of the biologicals. Biologicals that had the potential to really be disease modifying. They could alter the course of a disease or stop the progression of disease, but they were truly disease modifying. And that second wave of innovation was already substantial. Now we are really facing a third wave of innovation. And again, this is amazing science with the potential to be truly transformational. I hesitate to use the word curative, but certainly transformational. And so the entire science of genetic medicine and gene therapies has made tremendous progress even in one generation, and the potential for patients is enormous. So next slide, please. So when we talk about gene therapy, I think it's important to understand that there is various ways of entering into gene therapy. The basis is still that you're faced with a malfunctioning or non-functioning gene. And there's three basic approaches. You can try to silence a malfunctioning gene through using RNA inhibition. It really silences the expression of the malfunctioning gene. And some of these applications are currently already in the clinic. Then there is the technique of gene transfer, which is, we call it a gene transplantation, which is adding a functioning gene that takes over from the malfunctioning or non-functioning gene. And here again, some of these gene transfer treatments are already available to patients, and much more are to come. The most frequent approach with this gene transfer is the in vivo approach using recombinant adenoviral platform, and I'll talk to this in a little bit more detail in the next slide. And the other approach, sorry, previous slides. The other approach previous is the gene editing, which is really kind of, you could call it a cut and paste, where you take out a non-functioning gene and replace it by a functioning gene that is using some techniques such as CRISPR or zinc, and there's a permanent removal and replacement of a non-functioning gene. These therapies are also approaching quickly. Some of them are in clinical trial phase, and we expect that they will come to patients in the years to come. Next slide, please. So the concept of gene therapy is really, they have the potential to offer really long-term transformational benefits to rare disease patients. And I think it's important to understand here, these are one-time treatments. So they are not chronic, lifelong treatments. They are really one-time treatments offering lifelong transformational benefits to patients. Next slide, please. I think it's also important to notice, especially with the adenoviral platform, which is the most frequently used technique that is gene transfer. Unfortunately, not all patients are at the moment suitable for that type of therapy. There are a number of factors that limit the number of patients that ultimately are eligible. Frequent causes, for example, exposure to existing adenoviruses. Adenoviral viruses being used as a shuttle, as a vector to bring the gene into the target organ. Patients that have previous exposure to the virus may have an existing immune response, which makes them not suitable for the gene therapy. And there is other factors as well, like age, comorbidities, other factors that seriously limits the number of patients that are ultimately addressable. Of course, it's a challenge, and there is ongoing research to make sure that most, if not all, of the patients can get access to that type of gene therapy. There's still lots of work to do in that space. Next slide, please. But obviously, the benefits are very obvious, and the benefits are very clear to patients, but not only to patients, but certainly also for caregivers, healthcare system, and society. Next slide, please. But if we want these really transformational therapies to ultimately become available to patients, there are still a number of, well, let's call it bottlenecks or barriers that need to be overcome. And I'll mention a few. First is the delivery to patients. Right? it is clear that these are highly specialized therapies. Some of the logistics around transportation are obvious, and we learned some of it with the COVID vaccine experience. But clearly, these treatments will probably be reserved to centers of excellence or highly specialized centers that not only are knowledgeable about the disease, but also have the right infrastructure and competencies to infuse these patients with gene therapy. Of course, it also will require long-term follow-up because it's still premature and we need to understand the long-term impact in terms of safety, efficacy, etc. So it is obvious that these treatments will require a long-term follow-up, and that will also need to go along with some infrastructure. The value, how to adequately assess the value of these therapies is also a point that needs further discussion and alignment. Again, contrary to existing treatments, these are not chronic lifelong treatments. These are typically one-time treatments. So how to assess the value of these medicines adequately and appropriately is also a topic of ongoing discussion. And then the two others is in terms of regulation. I think it's fair to say that these products, given the fact that they impact some of the genome, are subject to very specific regulations, and it also needs some important policy shaping work to make sure that these medicines are adequately regulated and that regulation is ultimately not becoming a barrier to proper access to patients. I slightly discussed site preparedness, but in the interest of time, I will not go too much into this. Next, final slide, please. So the key message or the key takeaways is that with the science of gene therapy and with the promise of gene therapy, we have an opportunity to target the underlying genetic cause of disease and to become transformational and hopefully with time, maybe even curative. It certainly has the potential to offer long-term transformative benefits to patients. But in order for these treatments, in order for the science to become available to patients, it will need a very collaborative effort amongst all stakeholders, academia, pharma, policy, patient groups, etc., to make sure that we can find the appropriate solutions to bring these incredibly promising therapies to patients. So thank you very much for your attention, and I think I can hand over to the next speaker, Simone.
Thank you very much, Dirk. It was very short and very, very clear. And now we'll hear indeed from Simone Bozelli, who probably for many of you needs no introduction, because for me personally, he's truly the top Brussels go-to person on the topic of rare diseases. But it's a pleasure to have you, Simone. As you know, most of you, Simone is leading the public affairs work of EuroPBio, and EuroPBio is the voice of 30 million patients living with rare diseases across Europe. Thank you, Simone. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Violeta. You make me blush. This even not being in person is a very nice compliment. I think I cannot say that I am the voice. We have 30 million voices in Europe that are speaking very loud about the need for better treatment and extended access to the treatment that are existing for people living with a rare disease. Dirk has already done quite an excellent overview on why gene therapies particularly, but also advanced therapeutical medicinal products in general, are of interest and are representing a real hope for people living with rare diseases. Treatments that address the underlying genetic causes of the disease are raising fantastic hopes for our communities. As Dirk has mentioned, the two up to 80% of rare diseases are genetic in origin, and particularly that their onset is specifically in children in the 70% of the cases. Whilst people with rare diseases do have treatment available, they are mostly symptomatic, and only a very small minority of people living with a rare disease have access to transformative, potentially curative treatments. 2/3 of people living with a rare disease reported in our last survey on experience with treatment, which dates back to 2019, and therefore might have suffered a great impact due to the COVID-19 pandemic. 2/3 of the people living with a rare disease directly receive a treatment for their rare diseases, But, and this underlines our call for more and better treatment, those treatments are mainly not disease modifying, but symptomatic. Only 6% of them have received a curative treatment, while 42% of them have had symptomatic treatment, 25% a treatment that aimed to slow down the disease progression, and 4% reported that they have received a treatment that aimed at preventing the diseases. But 1/3, on the other hand, reported having received never received a treatment directly linked to their diseases. Their main reason being that, according to them, there is no existing treatments, not even in clinical trials. To realize the breakthrough potential of ATMPs, we do need innovation, but not only in the scientific development, but in processes, legislative processes, policy processes, and existing implementation of existing policies, legislation, regulation that in their current implementation are creating inequalities in Europe, as we're talking about Europe, but also worldwide. It cannot be possible, and this goes for personal experience, that every time a child that is diagnosed through that newborn screening with a treatment, with a condition that has a life transformative treatment available in another country, has to wait and not being able to access a speedy pathway to the delivery of this treatment. And therefore, we do have not only the issues in development or treatment, and we realize that we have been quite fortunate in Europe to have a regulation that has fostered a number of new treatments, but still at national level, we see that 22% of in our community could not get the treatment they needed because it was not available where they live. 14% of them could not get their treatment because the waiting list was too long. 12% of them could not pay for it, and 11% of them could not get it because they didn't have enough financial means to travel to another country. But we have at European level a fantastic window of opportunity represented by the overall discussion around the pharmaceutical strategy to review and revise and reform how we develop more treatment, better treatment, more available and more affordable. To capitalize on the lesson learned from COVID-19, particularly as Dirk mentioned it, but we need to focus on collaboration before competition when it comes to discussing what the key challenges and potential solutions are. We at Eurordis, with the Rare Impact Initiative, have started this already since 2018. But with our 2030 foresight study, which was published in February, we indicate a few recommendations to achieve what we called the AAA accessible, available, and affordable treatments, particularly on the early stage multi-stakeholder identification of unmet needs, a subsequent prioritization of investment, strengthening mandate for the European Medicine Agency, the Committee on Orphan Medicinal Product, to encompass early dialogue, ongoing scientific advice, protocol assistance, scientific qualification, particularly of patient-centered outcome measurement, risk-benefit assessment, and post-market requirements, but particularly for the accessibility and availability of therapies like gene therapies. A functional and efficient European level health technology assessment framework should support the assessment of effectiveness and relative effectiveness, and provide and support a continuum of comparative evidence generation throughout the product life cycle and the patient journey to enable those therapies to become and express their full potential. Those therapies, given their inherited challenges or small market treatments, if you allow me that term, requires much more collaboration. Whether this is voluntary, which is multi-country, is necessary. At Eurordis, we have expressed from many years now the need of much greater cooperation on not only assessment and hopefully the HTA negotiation, the negotiation on the HTA proposal for European cooperation will successfully continue, but also bringing together collaboration in pricing, value definition first, pricing, and eventually negotiation on procurement of these therapies, also learning on how on the possibility expressed by the action taken at European level during the COVID-19 pandemic between member states, supported by funding to generate the evidence, real world evidence across member states to reduce the uncertainties that these therapies bring about for the long-term follow-up following approval, particularly for advanced therapies for the rarest diseases. I'm very optimistic, Violeta, to be honest, that we are in what Dirk called the third generation of innovation, but that represent a real change for people living with rare diseases. Thank you very much. I think I've done in the 10 minutes, and I hope to have good questions and provide decent answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Simone, and thank you for outlining very important initiatives that we all hope to see folding out. And I'll come back to those. But first of all, we just have a very clear question to Dirk. And Gordon Honeyman is asking, which rare diseases are you, Dirk, focusing on in the first instance? If you could just get that question.
Yeah, I can certainly address that question. So at the moment with our company, we are focusing, so we have this gene therapy platform where we try to really capitalize on the existing recombinant adenoviral technique, so the gene transfer technique. The most advanced programs are in hemophilia A and B, in which we partner with 2 other companies. Also quite advanced, running already in pivotal trial is in a Duchenne, both in ambulatory as well as in non-ambulatory patients. And then we have other diseases that we hope to bring into clinical trials as well. First one will be Wilson disease. And then we're also looking into very rare neuromuscular, rare neurological disorders, and also rare cardiac disorders. So again, the science is extremely promising, and we really hope that of the first therapies we will be able to bring is hemophilia and also some neuromuscular diseases.
Thank you very much, Dirk. Gordon, I hope we answered your question. And I want to now, while we are waiting for more questions, I want to have a question to both of you, Dirk and Simone, because Simone has already mentioned the Rare 2030 Foresight study. And we are starting to talk about these 2030 objectives, and 2030 is not that far from us anymore. And to reach these objectives, we'll certainly need even more sense of urgency and more speed, I believe. And for example, with COVID, we have seen that whenever there is sense of urgency, solutions can be really accelerated and provided to patients who need them. And I really would like to hear from you whether you think there are learnings from our ongoing COVID-19 experience that we can apply in the area of rare disease and the development of gene therapies, which could help us achieve more progress and more and better treated rare disease patients.
Dirk, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Simone. So, I work for a company where we have some COVID experience, as you probably know. So, and I think it all starts. It all really starts with a common understanding and a common agreement on the sense of urgency. Right? And in the case of the COVID pandemic, that was very obvious. But I think it's also fair to say that there are some rare diseases that also have an extremely high unmet medical need. And some of these patients can really not afford waiting for another 10 or 20 years. I mean, their problem is now. And we need to do everything that is possible to really advance these therapies in the best possible way without compromising on quality, safety, and efficacy, of course. And that was always the leitmotif when we did the COVID development. So how can we advance these treatments without compromising on the quality, on the safety, and efficacy? That was the leitmotif all the way through. But I think it all starts with aligning with all the relevant stakeholders. And that was the key learning, right? And then as soon as you had that alignment, we were extremely fortunate to work with a very collaborative external stakeholders, whether it was a patient community, whether it was regulators, whether it was academia. And just to give some examples from a regulatory perspective, we had the opportunity to enter into very, very, very frequent consultation with the agency. So we clearly knew what they wanted and how they wanted. So this frequent consultation was a first element of success. Second element of success from a regulatory perspective was the opportunity to have what we call rolling reviews. So we did not have to wait till the data was final. We could submit the data as we collected them. And this again allowed for a very good discussion with the regulators. Two other elements I'd like to mention. One was an incredibly collaborative spirit from not only regulators, but also academia and, for example, ethics committees. Our reviews and the protocols were clearly prioritized, and we received really qualitative review in an extremely short period of time. And then the last one, which I will mention, which is specifically applicable to gene therapies, there was also a clear understanding from regulators and policymakers, because the COVID vaccine we had was also using an mRNA platform. And in principle, we would be subject to GMO legislation, genetic modified organisms. We received a temporary exemption on that regulation to allow for the proper production, export, and import and export of these medicines. And this was also a key for success to really scale up and being able to manufacture, produce, and export these medicines in record time. So I think the essence is believe in the science and also be extremely open for collaboration. And that was really the key to success for COVID.
Mm. For me, the COVID, if I may take my personal view, was like providing a magnifying glass to everyone on the life of people with rare diseases, not knowing what has hit them, not understanding what was coming through, the basic sense of isolation and frustration of not having adequate therapies for people living with rare disease. As my president, Turk Landers, had put it, we live in a daily emergency. And this is something that needs to be understood by everyone, that although we won't apply a rolling review, or there won't be a need for applying a rolling review for every single rare disease treatment. We can go through the normal channels, but the spirit of collaboration, the common and shared understanding of the problems that the community is facing is what should drive us. Clearly, the early dialogue that we have been asking for is necessary. Protocol assistance must be ensured, scientific advice also, to make sure that those therapies are qualitative, are efficacious, and they are safe for the patients, but also that arrive to them at the right time. And that's what we need to learn. But we also need to learn that things that we said that before the pandemic were not possible. I can only, one is joint procurement, also the other rolling review and others, but joint procurement was not possible, too difficult. We can't do it. It's been done. So clearly, if we have a will to do it and treat rare diseases as an emergency, in many cases, as Dirk also highlighted, are one of the biggest or the main reason for children dying before the age of 5. That's what we need to do. But we're not building on nothing. We are building on a very good infrastructure that goes from research, European joint programming for rare diseases, for example, to clinical care with the European reference network with 24 ERNs on that in that particular, with a regulation, although perhaps imperfect, but that provides the incentives to invest in those areas. We need to go from good to great in the next 9 years.
And Violetta, if I just may, because I think Simone made a very important, I think what he said is, where there is a will, there is a way. And if there is a common will, there is certainly a way to make sure that these treatments ultimately become available to patients. We may not always agree on all points, but we may want to agree that there is a need. And if we agree on the need, well, I'm sure we will find a way.
Immediately move, and I'm delighted to welcome another medical doctor to our discussion today. This is Ms. Sarah Serdic, who is a member of the European Parliament and who vice chairs the Parliament Special Committee on Cancer. She's been also a shadow rapporteur for the EU for Health program, which, as you know, has been created to fund health policies in the EU within this framework. And it is my pleasure to have you with us as you're one of the most pronounced MEPs on European health issues. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor, and thank you, EuropaBio, for the invitation. I would like to talk a bit about which policies are being deployed for innovative cancer treatments promoted by the Europe's Beating Cancer Plan. So when we talk about innovative cancer treatment, we need to have a more holistic view of what the European Union is doing concerning health. We must not forget that the provision of healthcare is a competence of member states, but protection of public health is a shared competence between EU and member states. So, having this said, we have that Europe's Beating Cancer Plan is a key pillar for the future of health policies, and we cannot forget, of course, the EU for Health program, the Europe's Beating Cancer Plan, as I said, the Europe Pharma strategy, among many other mechanisms that we will have. Talking about EU for Health, I was one of the negotiators. This is the most ambitious European health program so far. This will define the health action for the next 7 years. One of the 4 main goals with this plan is to improve the availability, accessibility, and affordability of medicinal products and medical devices, as well as crisis-relevant products in the Union, and supporting innovation regarding such products. At the same time, I would like to speak a bit about the European Pharma Strategy, which pretends to stimulate innovation in particular areas that we have unmet needs between pharmaceutical innovation that needs to be a bit more patient-centered, health system-centered, and take into account the multidisciplinary requirements, for instance, as long-term care settings, as it was spoken here. This strategy, what we aim is to create a stable and flexible regulatory environment that offers legal certainty for investment and accommodates technological trends. And these new health technologies should demonstrate their clinical added value and cost effectiveness compared to what already is there. So we don't want more of just apples. We want more apples, oranges, melons, if you understand this analogy between new technologies and fruit. So this needs to have a clinical added value and cost effectiveness compared to what already is in the market. And health technology assessment will be a tool to support this analysis. I would also like to talk a bit about advanced therapy medicinal products that are a new generation of innovative medicines based on genes, cells, and tissues. I will not go too much into detail because the speaker before me already mentioned this. These will be highly personalized approaches, and this indicates a new wave of treatments with the potential to cure diseases, including cancer. And even if they won't cure, they will dramatically improve patients' life expectancy and quality of life. One example is the CAR T cell therapy, which is already showing promising results in blood cancer. And here there is a significant opportunity for the healthcare sector to arise from the development of personalized medicine, genomics, and artificial intelligence, which will have an increased impact in cancer care and research. While cutting-edge technologies have the possibility of transforming cancer treatment landscape relating to treatments, this will require an environment that is supportive of healthcare innovation. So we have that scientific developments and new therapies such as gene and cell therapies that hold the potential to revolutionize the way that cancer is treated in the future, already in the present, will require measures to contribute to the adaptation of healthcare system, the current healthcare systems models. We have that the evolution of technologies and opportunities provided by these digital health tools will contribute to reducing the existing uncertainty around scientific evidence. We know from the health field that there's so many unanswered questions at the moment, and this evolution will allow us to provide and have access to more scientific evidence. And for this, we should also improve the availability of health data that can be used to create this evidence. So to finalize, and I would just like to say that to maximize the potential gains from these growing areas, EU must reduce obstacles to the collection, sharing, and usage of real-world data. In particular, there's a need of standardization of electronic health records, core outcome sets and registries. Right now, we need better interoperability among systems, and what we know is that the systems don't communicate.
Embrace these technologies. And I back to Sarah now, because Sarah, you are speaking to citizens and who really are the true European voice in our continent. How do you explain innovation to them? Do they understand the promise that gene and cell therapies bring to patients?
Yeah, and this question is very interesting because it relates me to one of the topics I've been advancing a lot as in my legislature as a member of the European Parliament, which relates directly with health literacy. So capacitate citizens to understand the different the different mechanisms of health. We don't want to educate medical doctors, or we don't want them to know specifically technical details, but what we want is to capacitate citizens to be able to understand the choices they make have a direct influence in their health status. So we want to promote healthier lifestyles. And this has to do, this health literacy has to do with innovation. How do we explain innovation to a citizen? This has to do with how will, because a singular person will want to know, will I be protected or not? And it's a matter of explaining what's the system out there. We have a really strong 27 together health systems throughout Europe. We're not bad. We still need to improve our accessibility, universal accessibility to healthcare, but we're not that bad. So we have a strong system, and it's a matter of explaining how these types of innovation will be an improvement for their type of healthcare that they will have when they go to these differentiated centers. And it's also a matter to tackle the accessibility of such centers.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Dirk?
Yeah, thank you, Violetta. And I think it is indeed a very important question. And in rare disease, we have a patient community that is typically extremely well informed. But nevertheless, I think we should realize that with these advanced cell and gene therapies, you touch the genome, and it triggers questions, and it starts with listening. And let me give you an example, because I had the opportunity to talk to some family members and patients that ultimately received a gene therapy. And these patients the patients and their families, they have questions. Should I have my son being dosed with gene therapy? Should I take, and they call it the risk. And it starts with listening. It really starts with listening to patients and families to understand what are their concerns, what are their questions, and then addressing them as good as we can. And this is not only the responsibility of the manufacturer or the industry, this is truly a collaborative effort. And events like these will hopefully increase to the understanding, but I think we should also see how can we best work together to adequately inform and educate the patient community. And I think one key word here is transparency. Right? We really need to be as transparent as we can, sharing our initial results, sharing the data, sharing the increased progress we have through real-world evidence, etc. And I think, again, this is not only the responsibility of a company like Pfizer or Kite, this is a joint responsibility that we share with your RORDIS, legislators, etc., etc. So, but again, I want to emphasize it starts with listening to the patients. It starts with listening to them, understand what their concerns are, and address those questions and concerns as good as we can collaboratively.
Thank you very much. So now I think I have the challenge to close this wonderful discussion without having finished it, because there's so many other questions that we can take. And Simone, I'm sure you would like to comment.
No, but Dirk said it all. I mean, we should have we should be at the center, and then therefore, my role is done. Thank you, Dirk. But yeah, thank you.
I think we're giving the audience a wonderful message that we're going to be successful. And I would really like to continue this discussion with you. And I promise you all, you'll be invited to the next event of this series, where we'll have many opportunities to discuss the topic at length. Thank you very much for your time. We've reached 80 participants today. Thank you, everybody, for your wonderful time. And have a good day. Bye.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.